What was Christmas? What do you remember Christmas being like during wartime?
Well, I don't remember much of it. Of course, it was only my mother. Father's not there. Um, I think we got an apple and an orange. Uh, and probably there would have been some years there wouldn't have been an orange because, of course, the oranges would have come from neutral Spain. Um, we didn't. It wasn't an awful lot different to any other day because with the rationing and so on, there's just no way you could have a spread. Um, we did usually have a chicken, not a turkey or anything. And the chicken generally would have been one of the hens that had stopped laying, so it was pretty tough.
For a hen?
Yeah. Well, it's tougher for the hen than for us, yeah, but it was tough to eat, you know.
Obviously, tough to eat as well.
Yeah, but I mean, we occasionally had a cockerel, kept cockerel, but I don't think I can't remember having one, but we may have done that at Christmas. But that's what we had, and then it would be whatever could be saved a little bit from the rations, you know.
Sorry, just needed to make sure we got a red light on you.
Yeah, okay. You have, yeah,
good.
okay,
Yeah.
right.
So
Yeah.
you had your own hens at home?
We kept our own hens. What happened was you could forego your egg ration, and then that gave you meal and so on for the chickens. You could get that instead of your egg ration. But my cousin Jill, I was talking to Jill a couple of days ago, she said that the balance of the eggs that we had, because we were almost brother and sister during the war, because we were the eldest of the children, you know. She said that they had to be sold back to the shop. And then, of course, you had a period when the hens didn't lay, and the eggs were coated, the surplus eggs were coated in water glass, a chemical, and put into a big bucket, basically an enamel bucket. And they were not of any use for normal eating, you know, as boiled eggs or whatever. But if you wanted to make a cake, or which we occasionally had, but even then, cakes were what we used to call railway cake, a current for every station. They were there wasn't an awful lot of dried fruit around. So that's actually what June's father used to call it, railway cake, and we did as well. So that was basically the chicken side of it. But yes, I mean, nothing was wasted. So any chicken that stopped laying was dispatched and cooked
in the pot.
In the pot. I think, did I say about rabbits or?
You did talk about rabbits. Yes.
Yeah.
You said you had some
Well, that was the other thing.
rabbit.
Yeah, because there was there were two big wheat fields across the railway line from us, and this reaper would go round. Sometimes it was horse-drawn, sometimes it was a tractor, and it would go, and the amount of wheat would get smaller and smaller, and we kids were there waiting for the rabbit.
So you were there.
We'd bang it over the head if we
bang it over the head
and take it home to mum.
And did the rabbits escape?
Oh, some escaped, but some went to the pot. And so, and of course, poor mum didn't think anything about it, but she had to skin it and gut it and what have you.
Do all that.
But I heard a funny story after the war, and that's not really here or there, but if you got chicken, even shortly after the war, we used to say, "Oh, this is just rabbit dressed up as chicken," and there was somebody was advertising a rabbit pie on a menu somewhere, and the guy said, and this was only about sort of 15 years ago, "This is just rabbit. This is just chicken dressed up as rabbit." He said, but yeah.
At the time, which would you prefer? Would you prefer chicken or rabbit?
I think rabbit, because it wasn't as tough as most of the chicken that we had, but it was a rarity. We were a bit too young to go up with wires and catch rabbits up the hill, what we call Maggot Hill, where there are quite a lot of rabbits. But the older kids went up to do that, and just put a wire just where the rabbit hole was, and catch the rabbit. I know it sounds, the kids will probably think it very cruel, but well, it wasn't actually survival, but we didn't have anything to spare.
No. So if you didn't catch a rabbit, it might have meant going a bit hungry.
Yeah, well, it might have been going back to a tin of Spam or something other. As I said, we twice or three times got a food parcel from a Dorset uncle who lived in New York. He'd had an interesting life. He was one of the Martins from Dorchester, and he'd gone to Australia as a valet to the Governor General of Australia, and after that was ended, he became a valet to one of the big moguls in New York. I'm not sure if he's a railway baron or a steel baron or something like that. And there's an article about him in the Dorset County Magazine or something like that, I remember, about he was arranging all sorts of things to come back to Britain. He was very active.
And he used to send you food parcels?
He used to send us and other members of the family as well, food parcels.
So what did he send you?
Well, I can't really remember, but I know we seemed to have dried eggs, bacon in tins, Spam, things like that. Obviously, it had to be things that didn't need refrigerating or anything, because there weren't any fridges.
So to those who don't know what Spam is, tell us what Spam is.
It's a kind of minced pork in a funny shaped tin, as corned beef was in a funny shaped tin. That's the other thing we had, and it's fairly finely minced. It didn't, looking back on it, have much taste.
Did you like it?
We ate it. The children of today wouldn't realise that, because there wasn't a choice. You just had to eat whatever was available. My mother and every other mother couldn't spirit things out of the air.
So what did she do with the Spam? How did she prepare it?
Sometimes we had it cold. Sometimes we had it as Spam fritters, fried. Sometimes we had the dried egg as dried egg omelettes. For many years afterwards.
What were they like?
Well, many years afterwards, I thought that omelettes were rather like a pancake. So that's what they were like, because there was no air in them, of course, so they were nothing like an omelette, really. So, yes, an egg pancake, I suppose.
So, did you like them?
Yeah, they were all right.
So at Christmas time, let's just go back to Christmas. Would there have been any decorations?
Yes, we used to make decorations. We had strips of coloured paper that I think they had adhesive on them, and you would just turn them round to be an oval, and then put the next one to it and make it.
Chains, yes.
And that would have been our decoration, plus a bit of holly, because just had to go into the meadows or whatever and cut the holly.
Tree?
Do we have it?
Tree?
I don't think so. I don't remember a Christmas tree. Sorry. But no, I mean, there wasn't anything special for Christmas except for that Christmas that I remember with the prisoners. And they must have spent months making these toys.
Yeah, so tell us about that.
Well, I think I got a wooden...
No. So this wasn't at home in Wool, was it?
No, this was in West Loworth.
Where you went to stay with?
Grandma. She lived in number 20 West Loworth, near the War Memorial. I don't know whether you know West Loworth. And the prison camp was where the car park for Loworth Cove is now.
Yes.
The car park used to be down near the Cove when I worked there for a short while. But yes, up near the present car park, that was a prison camp. And several people on these websites have said to me, there's no record of a prison camp there. It was at Loworth Camp, the military camp at East Loworth, you know. But I've checked again with cousin Jill, who is 9 months older than me and got a better memory. And she is quite adamant as well, and she remembers being there for Christmas. So we frequently went to both my aunt in Hollowditch, I mentioned, you know, and
Creech.
That's near Creech, yeah. It's out on what are now the ranges,
Yes.
You know, the Tyneham ranges. I mean, everyone thinks that Tyneham was purely the village, but of course it isn't. It's an area right through to East Loworth, halfway to Stowborough and so on.
Yeah.
That was the one that she and everyone else got 3 weeks' notice to leave their houses.
So where did she live?
Where did she live afterwards?
No, where did she live? Was she in
she was the one at Hollowditch. She had the farm. Her husband had died in 1939, so she wasn't farming anymore. She was the one with the solitary cow, I think I mentioned. And if I was over there, we'd make butter in a little glass thing with a handle on top. You just put a pint or so of milk in, full cream milk, and just put it round and round, and eventually you'd end up with a knob of butter and some buttermilk, you know, the almost like white water, nothing much in it, fully skimmed milk, I suppose.
So when butter was scarce, you were making your own?
She was making her own, yes. It was only there because there wasn't a shop anywhere near her anyway, and she was still pretty self-sufficient.
And this is where your cousin Jill lived?
No, nobody lived with Aunt Sue at that time. I've got a picture, I can send you a picture of Hollowditch Farm, quite a substantial farmhouse. But the only people who'd lived there up until 1936 were Uncle Matt, Aunt Sue, and my father. And my father left, of course, when he married my mother.
And so then with the arrival of the Americans, she also got moved out of Hollowditch
Yes,
Farm.
yes. Everyone, the Americans needed it for training for what we now know as D-Day. Nobody knew that's what it was. And I think it was in November, they were all given 3 weeks' notice to vacate the place. And they went in all directions. Sue was given the use of a house in Kimmeridge, and I've now chanced on that. That had been a pub originally, the village pub in Kimmeridge. It's a very attractive house. We went to Kimmeridge 2 or 3 years ago, I suppose, and I was looking for number 22, and I stood by the gate of a place. There was a gardener tending the gate there, tending the garden in front there. And I said, "Can you tell me where number 22 is?" And he just pointed to the 5-bar gate. It had number 22 on it. And it was a substantial house. It was semi-detached, but it was the size of the house over there. big house, and it had a copse at the back and so on. So in 1944-45, instead of going to Hollowditch, I used to be taken to Kimmeridge for time. That's where I learnt to swim on the ledges at Kimmeridge.
So did she ever go back to Hollowditch?
No, none of them were. I've written an article about it, which I've called Hollowditch and a Hollow Promise. They were promised after the war they would be able to return. They can't. The house is now, the walls are still standing, but the roof is caved in and so on. And there's an enormous clay pit there. And this clay pit will eventually encroach on where Hollowditch is. I can't understand the mechanics of the military saying they need this for training, but they're prepared to sell the rights to the clay, if you see what I mean, to a French company as it is now. But they can't or won't allow the people to go back. I mean, that said, Sue was only a tenant because the Bond family owned everything around there. So she had no claim, but fortunately they had sold the stock when Matt died. There is on one of the websites, the Tyneham site, I think, there's a thing from Cotties, the estate agents in Dorchester, it used to be, the sale of the cattle and the contents and what have you. So Sue had money from that. So she wasn't poor by any means, but she didn't own the house.
I mean, you probably you wouldn't have remembered her being at Hollowditch.
I've been to Hollowditch, yes.
Can you remember?
Yes, I can remember. I can remember being there in the year before. Well, the year that she was kicked out. I was there in the summer during summer holidays. My mum must have taken me all the way from Wool to Creech on her bicycle. I was stuck on the back of the bike. Well, our neighbour, Mrs. Short, looked after my brother. That's the only way I could have done.
That's a fair ride, isn't it?
Yes, it's a fair old ride. That's about 8 miles.
And you were sat on the carrier?
I was sat on the carrier at the back.
Not very comfortable?
No, but and Mum had, fortunately it's pretty flat all the way, but it's still a long ride. And then she would have to come over and pick me up. So I would spend a week or two over there. But never having had a young boy, I suppose my brother was about that sort of age when, my father rather, when he was sent there, when his mother had TB. But Sue was not the motherly sort, really. She never had children of her own, you know.
And so you rode on the back of the bike from where?
From Wool.
All the way from Wool?
All the way from Wool. As I say, I think it would have been about 8 miles, something like that.
That's a fair ride.
Yeah. There's another funny story about distances, and I don't know, I've only put it in this, and you may or may not want to use it, but you can edit it if you wish. I went to school in 1941. It's still the primary school in Wool, and I had a little accident and pooed my pants, and I was sent to walk home. But Mother was up at East Burton Farm working. She did some housework in the mornings there and helped in the dairy. And I was sent all the way from school home, Collier's Lane, down Bailey's Drove, across the main railway line as a 5-year-old, and then to walk up to the farm. And Mother was mad that the teachers are all women. Surely one of those women could have helped you with that, you know, but there we are.
So remind me where home was.
Home was a bungalow called Landcress, which was near the level crossing at the bottom of Bailey's Drove. if you came across the crossing from Bailey's Drove onto East Burton Road, the railway cottage was on the corner, and Landcrest, our bungalow, was next to it. The railway cottage is now gone. My father bought the land and built another bungalow where the railway cottage is, and that's where he and my mother lived until he died, and well, until she died.
That's a fair walk from school.
I looked it up on Google. It's a full mile to go up to East Burton Farm. So yeah, for a 5-year-old, that's presumably half an hour's walk, probably in tears, and you know.
Not feeling very comfortable either.
No, and in the war.
In the war.
Yeah.
Dear. All right. Now I've got to take you back to Christmas.
Yes, right. Yes. Okay.
So would you have had any Christmas presents from your mum? Dad was away.
Yeah,
Presents, do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think there would have been. I mean, Mum would have maybe knitted something or would have made something, but that was it. There was no question of going to the shops to buy this or that.
Got a woolly hat, perhaps, or something.
Yeah, something like that. A pair of gloves. You know, something like that.
But then one year you did get some Christmas presents unexpectedly, or a Christmas present unexpectedly. So just tell me how that happened and who it was.
For some reason, my cousin and I were with my grandmother in West Lowworth, number 20 West Lowworth. It's now called Honeysuckle Cottage, apparently. And I've got this memory of these soldiers, the prisoners. I think they may have been Italian, but I can't be absolutely sure. And they came up through the village. They had lanterns and they had toys with them. And they sought out the cottages with the people with children and gave us toys that they had made. Yeah. Well, it was quite strange because in those days, probably with the noise or whatever, the door would have been open even at Christmas. I mean, Granny never ever locked her door. Nobody did in those days. And in the summer, the door was always open, and any of the neighbours who wanted to talk to Granny just poked their head inside and said, "Are you there, Annie?" or whatever, you know. So they would have come up through and, as I said, knocked on the door and said, "Do you have children?" And of course we too would have gone to the door, and they gave us both presents. But I can't remember what, quite honestly. No, but I do know that they were all things that they'd made. And of course, amongst all groups of prisoners, there were quite a few tradesmen and talented people, you know.
Did they seem like a happy lot?
Yeah, they were the prisoners. We had both German prisoners and Italian prisoners in the area, and quite a lot of them worked on farms as extra labour, and they had to go back to the prison camp at night. Eventually, some of them married local girls. Some of them didn't want to go back to Germany or to Italy, you know.
You didn't get to know any of them?
No. That would have been regarded, I think, as fraternisation, probably, which would have been frowned upon. But, I mean, they were not ignored, or they were already part of the village to some extent. And as I say, they did useful labour. And I think they got paid a small amount. I mean, farm labourers got paid a pitiful amount anyway, and they would have probably only got half the wages that a farm labourer got. But it gave them a little bit of money, so they could buy a few little things, you know.
They could write home and things like that.
Sorry, could they
write home?
I don't know what the situation was with letters. I very much doubt it, because I think I mentioned somewhere along the way that when Dad sent a letter, or it was a letter as a birthday card or a Christmas card, I've still got a couple of examples of them. These were photographed in North Africa, where my dad was at the time, and the roll of film was then put on an aircraft. So you would get 1,000 letters on a roll of film, if you could imagine. They would be developed over here and then sent in the post to wherever they were going. So this was a way, rather than have an aircraft stuffed full of letters, and also it was easier for the censor to check, through it all. Yeah, so that was it. Because, I mean, sometimes the censor would cut great chunks of something out to say, we've gone to Mina Al Ahmadi, and oh no, that's got to come out, and so on. Or we lost 50 men yesterday. No, cut that out.
So tell us a bit about your dad. When did you see him?
When did I see him? Well, he signed up on the 11th of March 1940. It was his birthday. I think that was his 25th birthday. The call-up was in various age groups, and I think that must have been his age time. So he rode his motorcycle from Wool down to Weymouth, to the sort of recruiting office, and he said, right, well, I'm a carpenter and joiner, and I'm ready to join the Royal Engineers, where all the tradesmen normally went. And that they will call him the recruiting sergeant. I don't quite know who was there. Said, well, we got enough chippies. We don't need chippies in the army. How did you get here? He said, I got here on my motorbike. Okay, dispatch rider. So it was as quick as that, apparently. Father hated being a dispatch rider, not because he didn't like riding a motorbike. He loved his motorbike. But he felt that he had a trade, and he should be practicing his trade. So he was not the happiest of soldiers. Occasionally became a lance corporal or a corporal, and then quickly lost it for being cheeky to an officer or something like that. But he finally, as they got to Italy, he finally got into the engineers, and he quickly became a sergeant then in the engineers. And he spent quite a lot of time in northern Italy building a bridge over one of the rivers there. I don't know which river. My mother knew which village he was billeted on, because by the sound of it he had some sort of affair in northern Italy. So I've often wondered if I've got any relations down there. And then
So he started in Africa?
He started in Africa. He went out on one of the convoys, WS convoys. They were nicknamed Winston Specials. This was how the troops were taken out. But they had to go all the way round the Cape of Good Hope, southern Africa, because, of course, the Mediterranean was closed. The Germans were almost in control of it, and of course, the Italians even more so. So the troop ships went all the way round as big convoys. And he went out on a ship that had been a Cunarder, had been sold to the Greeks. It was called Nea Hellas. But it was always known to the troops as Nearer to Hell, because it was such an awful ship. But here's my wife coming here. He remembers being on that Greek ship, and he remembers the captain during attacks and so on, the captain being on the bridge all the time, and during storms and the like. And then they were landed at, I think, Port Tewfik, but I'm not absolutely sure of that. I've got his army records, but they're rather difficult to understand. And then, of course, they fought their way through North Africa and had to retreat many times, and eventually made their way up to Tunisia and then across to land in Italy. And yeah, so I said I've got a couple of these
So
cards
that
that
was
Dad
one
said.
of the war's big campaigns, wasn't
Yes, yeah. They had a saying that the ideal army was Rommel as a general, American food, no, French food was it? American uniforms, and British Tommies. Of course, they thought they were the best. And
wasn't it that Rommel never lost a battle till El Alamein, and after that he never won a battle?
Yeah, I suppose that's probably true because, of course, it was Rommel who was in charge at D-Day. Rommel had gone home for his wife's birthday at D-Day, unknowingly. And so when they landed, he had to rush back to northern France to take over. But he was arguably the best general in World War II, bar none, you know.
So when did you get to see your father again?
Well, we first went up to Egham when after he did his initial training. We went up to a rented house in Egham. That's where, as I said, I got my war wound. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about that?
When you came off your bike?
Yeah. It wasn't my bike. It was what must have happened was, and I only got this from my mother and father, my mother afterwards, I think. This man saw me there. The sirens went, and it must have been around my birthday, which is on the 28th September, and he must have said, "Come on, I'll take you to the shelter." Stuck me on his crossbar, and bicycles in those days had all men's bicycles had a bar. But I slipped off, and I must have cut my head. So whoever this man was, had enough sense to take me to the hospital. So during the air raid, I was having stitches put in my head. So that's my war wound. As I say, I can't remember that. No.
So when did you see your dad after that?
Right, okay. And then we came back to Wool, and some while afterwards, 1942, Dad went out on the ship. I didn't see him until after V-Day, when sometime afterwards, and I couldn't tell you exactly when, he was sent home on what they called demob leave, but then he had to go back because he was by that time doing the job of an assistant foreman in the joinery shop in a place in Greece. I've tracked it down, I think it was near Salonika, and what they were doing was making prefabricated huts for people to live in, displaced people, which is quite funny because the reason we moved to Wool in the first place was that he got a job in Bovington Camp putting up prefabricated buildings for the soldiers. So yes, he had a few weeks leave. I don't think my brother and I were at all impressed with this bloke coming, and because life was fine with Mum, and
because
that was
you
that.
Didn't really know him at that point,
No, we didn't know him. Well, Eric didn't know him at all, of course, because Eric had been less than a year old when he last saw his father, and then Dad got demobbed someone in 1946 after they'd. I don't know quite what the army did about these buildings, whether they built enough buildings or whether they used Greek labour after that to make them. Eric and I have got a memory of my father saying that after Italy they first went up to Austria, but I can't find that in his record. But I've got down, I have still a steel ruler that is obviously German, so it may well be that he was in Austria. Yeah.
So just while we're talking about air raids, let's just focus on that for a little bit. What do you remember about being in an air raid?
I don't really remember I don't remember anything. Occasionally, I think the railway line would be shot at. That two things happen with bombers coming back from bombing Portland and Weymouth particularly. Some of them would follow the railway line back. If they had any bombs left, some of them had not got to the target properly or whatever. They didn't want to take the bombs back to France for two reasons. One, it would have been dangerous landing with a bomb. Secondly, of course, they would have probably got court-martialed because they hadn't bombed. So they let the bombs go in various places along the railway line. The only bomb damage I know of was there used to be a level crossing up near a pub called the Seven Stars up at East Burton, and that was destroyed and never rebuilt. When I was a kid, you could still see the track up to the level crossing, which would have gone across and to where the atomic research place is now or was. But barring that, I don't remember much about air raids.
Being in the shelter?
We didn't spend much time in it. I can't really remember the shelter. We gave up. Dad built the shelter before it left, but we gave that up quite early on and spent most of the raids under the kitchen table, as most people did, because the shelters were so wet and cold. I mean, you can imagine a shelter on the edge of the meadows at Wool. It was pretty damp, because that ground is always damp. So yes, if people in bungalows lived under the kitchen table, people in houses lived under the stairs, or not lived, but went under the stairs for a raid.
So did you spend a lot of time under the kitchen table?
I don't really remember how long we spent. I mean, or sometimes you'd have a raid night after night, and then you go weeks and not have one. So
when there was a raid, were you aware of it?
Yes, I think I said somewhere that, I mean, if you saw aircraft, the first thought was, is it one of ours or one of theirs? If it was one of theirs, you dived into a ditch or whatever, you know. And you would hear an air raid siren, so you knew that, there was a raid. Not every time that there was an air raid siren, it followed that there was a raid, because sometimes the bombers would divert one way or another. But we were lucky in a place like Wool. There weren't an awful lot of targets. I mean, Bovington would have been a bit of a target. Poole was a big target, particularly because the flying boats came into Wareham Channel rather than up here in Southampton during the war. But we did. I don't remember being sort of constantly in air raids or anything.
And as a young lad, were you good at recognising aircraft when you saw them?
Yes. Grant was in the Observer Corps, and they had up near the Coast Guard station on the cliffs at Loworth Cove, they had their lookout. And in the lookout, amongst things, was a book of silhouettes of aircraft. And so you could recognise aircraft. We could recognise, obviously, British aircraft. We knew a difference between a Spitfire and a Hurricane, particularly because there was an airfield up at Warmwell, not far from us.
And you saw them a lot, I suppose?
Quite a lot. In fact, one crashed quite near us down what they call Bindon Lane, and we rushed down to see that. And the policeman told us to, I won't tell you what he told us, but go away. But you knew.
But what about German planes? Did you see many of those?
Well, we didn't have a lot of air raids, so we didn't see a lot of German planes. And of course, a lot of the bombing was done at night rather than during the day. So I can't say we saw a great deal of them.
So tell us about the gliders on just before D-Day, or on D-Day.
Yeah, there's an airfield now. Is it Tarrant Rushton?
Yes.
That was a big glider place. So the aircraft were going over all day, towing 1 or 2 gliders off to Normandy. I can remember my mother crying at the thought that a lot of men were going to die. You know, it was obvious to everyone. To us children, well, just a bit more of the war, you know, we didn't really understand. And the aircraft were all specially marked. They had to, there was really a problem with what nowadays they call friendly fire, that the ships and what have you needed to distinguish between German aircraft and British and American aircraft very quickly. So the aircraft had black and white stripes on their wings, the top and bottom, so you could instantly look up and say, that's one of ours. That was a clever idea that somebody'd come up with. But beyond, I mean, I remember the gliders seemingly all day. Now that may or may not be true, but there were a lot of them.
And some people were marvelling at them, but in your mother's case, she was crying because she knew what was happening.
Yeah, that's the only memory I've got, is Mum crying. Yeah.
And she was obviously really upset.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, that's interesting.
And I don't know whether I put that in D-Day. I was 3 days before D-Day, 3 or 4 days. I was at Chickerell near Weymouth.
Oh yes, yeah.
And oh yes, I did mention that. Yeah. There were columns of American lorries with their long bonnets, or hoods as they called them. Nearly all of the troops were black. They were cheerful, happy souls going away, and they were throwing the things out of the cars that they didn't need.
Oh, yeah.
And the boy just down the road from me got a 10-shilling note, which that's only 50 pence now, but that was a lot of money. That was a third of the wages of a private soldier at the time.
Was that
So
lot of money?
that was,
Do you remember his
no, I don't remember his name. I got a bar of chocolate, lovely big bar of chocolate, which I rushed indoors and showed my mum. And she pointed out that it was called laxative chocolate. I didn't know the meaning of laxative. Fortunately, she did. So I didn't get to eat the chocolate, so I didn't get to spend D-Day on the lavatory, which was rather fortunate.
Yes, but you might have.
Yeah, I might have, yeah.
That's funny. That's a funny story. Here's something completely different. Oh, so did you speak to any of the black GIs?
No, we didn't have chance to talk to them. We just waved to them, and yeah, because they were. This procession was going on at a steady speed. I mean, I think it was probably only about 10 miles an hour, because the tailback, obviously, they had to get into Weymouth and on to Portland, where there were 3 ramps at Portland. Everyone talks of them going from Weymouth, which a lot of the troops did. They were ferried out from Weymouth onto the waiting ships. Everybody talks about landing craft, but there were much bigger landing ships out in Weymouth Bay and every other of the ports. And these big landing ships, in this case, were mostly American. 2 of them were British, I now know from researching it. They would take about 1,300 infantrymen, and they had small landing craft all the way down the side. So the men were ferried out to there. but the tanks and the half-tracks, as they called them, went on to Portland, where there were ramps, and they were loaded at the ramps. Now you sit down, please. Sit. There's a good boy. Yeah, they were loaded at the ramps there.
So another something completely different, Roy. What songs did you sing?
Army songs were popular. It's a long way to Tipperary and so on. We had rude songs like Hitler Has Only Got One Ball. Goring has two, but very small. Would you like the rest of it?
I think people know it.
Yeah. And songs from all over the country, like the Sky Boat song and Irish songs. And
does anything particularly stand out from your very early days, your early life?
No, not really. I was trying to think about
something by. Would you listen to Flanagan and Allen, for example? Would you listen to Arthur Askey?
I see. Well, yeah. The radio, there was workers' playtime, particularly in the middle of the day. And Mum lived for Sunday nights. It was, now I'm trying to think, a violinist and his orchestra was set 7:30 on a Sunday evening. My mother very much enjoyed that and decided that I should learn to play the violin. I still, after a fashion, I don't remember having any talent for the violin whatsoever. But oh yeah, the song I used to sing as a boy was it's gone out of my head again now. Greensleeves. So yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about what it was like in the shelter, and you didn't spend a lot of time there. We've talked about the planes, and you were quite good at identifying some of them, but didn't see them. You said you once had whale meat to eat.
Yes. Now I look back on it, and that was just after the war. Whaling had stopped during the war, but the ships went back to South Georgia to start whaling again immediately after VE Day, because there are some pictures on one of the websites of one of the whale factory ships loading here in Southampton.
Right. Not your favourite food?
Only had it the once, and it was somewhere between liver and fish. The texture was horrible, and that was one of the few foods that I think Mother said we're not having that again. So it was a short-lived thing.
Presumably, living in a rural area like Dorset and Wool, you were probably in a way better off for a certain amount of fresh fruit and veg and eggs and some food than you.
Oh yes, we were better off than people in the cities, definitely. My mother gardened, having taken that over from my father, of course. So we always had in season we had vegetables, but that meant a very short season. For instance, the runner beans were only there for a few weeks in the summer. You look forward to that sort of thing. Then in the winter it had to be root vegetables, so carrots and what have you. Sometimes horrible turnips and not such nice things. I don't ever remember the Dorset mangelwurzel, but that's presumably we ate that sort of thing, and that was sort of dressed up as various things. Fruit, We didn't have fruit trees in our garden because the bungalow had only been built in 1936, and therefore there wasn't long enough for an orchard to mature or anything. So I don't remember us having fruit trees. Certainly at Hollowditch, there was plenty of fruit. There's still the remains of the fruit trees are still there when we went about 5 years ago.
Can you get there? Can you still go there?
You can't. Ordinarily, you can't go. But I wrote to the military some years ago and asked whether we could go back to, actually to go back to the village of, or the hamlet of Whiteway, which is where my father's mother's family lived. And they said, yes, certainly, we'll arrange for a ranger to take you. And then I said, well, could I add Hollowditch to that? And they said, yes. And we got to, we went down the road past Grange House and parked on the side of the road. And a man from the clay pit, one of the drivers from the clay pit, came out and said, you can't park there. This is military land or whatever. And we said, well, we're waiting for the ranger. Ah, right, okay. That was all right. And the ranger came and he said, right, I'm here, I'm with you for the day. Where do you want to go? So the first thing we did was to drive towards Hollowditch, the farm, and I managed to pick out where the old clay pit railway ran, and I could remember where I was picking wild strawberries in 1943, because I gave myself tummy ache because I hadn't seen so many wild strawberries, and I ate every one I could see. So I wasn't too well a boy that night. And we drove up to the house, June and I, and we've got a photograph of us in front of the house, because I have a photograph of Aunt Sue and Uncle Matt standing in the porchway of the house as well. So I'm able to have the two photographs alongside one another. And we went right round the house into the orchard and into where the cow sheds had been. We're able to just wander.
I mean, you probably would have only known this from afterwards, but what was the feeling like when all of those people living on that big area of land were told you got 3 weeks to clear off?
It was strange now, I think. They did it. Some of them were broken-hearted, undoubtedly, but there was a war on, and they knew. People did as they were told, in general, and they just accepted it. Some people went to stay with relations, as I said about Aunt Sue going to Kimmeridge.
How was she about it? Was she?
I don't really remember. I know that to her dying day, and she died in 1947, she dreamt of going back to her house, and many of them do. A number of them managed to be buried at Tyneham. Sue was buried at Creech, but I think the last one to be buried at Tyneham was a man buried there about 5 years ago. I think almost the last one was the man who took our wedding photographs. He was buried at Tyneham churchyard.
Who was that?
Yeah, now.
I might have known him.
Yeah, I'm going to have to ask the boss. Because my memory is not as good. Can I? Yeah.
I can't remember his name either.
No. Hello? Who took our wedding photographs? Grant. Yeah. Well, you know him or know of him? Yeah.
I didn't know him fantastically well.
No.
But I mean, I came to Dorset in 1980 to work for the Echo,
Oh, right.
in Weymouth.
Well, yes.
And so occasionally I did a job with Arthur Grant.
Yes.
So, I did know him
Yes.
really well.
Yes.
I mean, I phoned him up a lot.
Yes.
So could you get over to so-and-so and take a picture of whatever it was?
Yes.
Because when he had his shop in Wareham, he was our sort of go-to freelance photographer.
Oh, I see, for that area, yeah.
So whenever there was a story in Wareham, we'd
Yes.
get on the phone to. I mean, it's a far cry from what it is today.
Yes.
But it was a decent-sized evening paper then.
Yes.
And with quite a lot of staff.
Yeah.
And it was very much. It was described to me before I was young, but as a bit of a dead man's shoes paper, because
Yes.
the majority of the reporting staff were all old.
Yes.
Older.
Yes.
20, 25 years older than me.
Yes.
I was 20, late 20s, I suppose.
Yeah, ancient men of 50 or something.
Yes,
Yes.
But Arthur Grant.
Yeah.
So I used to love going to see Arthur because he was such a lovely guy.
Well, he'd been at sea, I think, during the war, as far as I could gather.
But I do, when we go to Tyneham every now and then.
Yes.
We went this summer. We took 2 of our grandchildren this summer.
Right.
For a day, and we went down and we swam at Wartbarrow Bay.
Yes.
And we all swam in the sea, and it was glorious.
Yes.
But went to look at Arthur's. I always go and look at Arthur's house. And just,
Yes.
say hello to him.
Yes.
And he was a lovely chap.
Yes.
He was had that lovely, gentle Dorset accent.
Yes.
Very, very nice, really nice man.
Yes.
Yeah. It's tinged with sadness, the whole place, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Because of how it's happened, but then in another way, it's kind of preserved.
Yes.
In that way.
I don't know what to feel about it, but I do sometimes get a bit upset when everyone just talks about Tyneham, the village, as if it's only the village. I mean, I mentioned Whiteway. Now, Whiteway, there's nothing there now. You can't, well, I was going to say you can't see the footings. Well, of course, most of the cottages didn't have footings, proper footings as we do nowadays. They started building on the ground and up they went. My great-great-great-grandfather, William Bolson, on that side, he put his cottage up there in about 1826, and I think it was the first cottage at Whiteway, because there's a man who, I'm trying to think now, these names escape me a bit, but there's a man from East Lowworth who kept a diary all the way through the 19th century, and he mentions this house being built, and he refers to it across the lake, that's Luckford Lake, which is a very little stream, and south of the road to Povington. Now, so he doesn't refer to Whiteway Farm or anything. Had there been another building, I think he would have referred to it. And I suspect that Bolson built his cottage there because I suspect he had a night job. Lillian Bond wrote about Bolson's Gap, a gap at the top of Whiteway Hill. There's a big gap in the fence that she thought Bolson made, but he went to work in Tyneham House, because that one of the Bolsons was a woodman at Tyneham House, working for the Bonds there. I suspect that gap was made by bigger things than Bolson, because I think smuggling was rife at that time, still in the 1820s to 1840. And I reckon that Bolson probably had a job guiding the landers across the fields, across past East Lowworth, down through Wool, up to Beer Regis, with the contraband. Because that gave him, A, showed him where this place was, and B, gave him a bit of extra income, and he built his cottage there. Now,
this is at Whiteway.
At Whiteway, yeah. and then other cottages were built, and then a farm was built. But when you look at Whiteway Farm, was the most substantial building there, and that was red brick, where the others were just cob and what have you. So I suspect that Whiteway Farm wasn't built until late Victorian times, or maybe early Edwardian times, something like that.
Is any of it left?
June and I couldn't find anything at all. Unfortunately, I didn't have. I've since got a plan of Whiteway and where the various plots were. Martin White, who does a lot of work on Tyneham and so on, put this plan on, and I can now see where the various buildings were, including William Bolson's cottage and his enclosure. Well, we're getting off thing, aren't we, really? But yeah.
I don't think the American Army were too fussy about which buildings they hit.
Oh, no.
And they were doing live firing practices for D-Day.
Yes, yeah.
They were shooting.
I think it would probably been part of the fun just to drive a tank through the hamlet, you know, of hovels, as somebody called them. I mean, they were simple cottages, very simple.
I can't actually. I mean, I need to look it up. I can't think. I know I can see Whiteway Hill, but I can't think where the houses would have been.
I can send you on. I'll send you on some stuff, and including a plan of where it was. If you can imagine coming along the western part of Whiteway Hill, have you any idea where Luckford Lake runs? The little stream that runs into the Froome from Whiteway Hill, because that's the boundary of the Isle of Purbeck. Right. Nominally, you know, I mean, it's only wide there, but that's the reason I think he wanted to be there, because of course, it's mostly heathland, but there you got the chalk as well in the stream. So it would have been more productive bit of ground, because you got the limey chalk, you know, to counteract the acid of the heath. Yeah, but that's where it is. If you can imagine going from there towards East Lowworth, that's where Whiteway was. Right. And then Povington was a couple of miles to the east of that. There's a road going, a trackway going all the way through to Creech.
All of that is still in the MOD area?
That's all in the MOD area. It's if you...
Clearer.
Do you know where Grange House is?
Roughly.
Yeah. Well, if you go past Grange House, there's a trackway down, and that takes you down, and that would have been the trackway all the way through Whiteway, at Povington and Whiteway and so on. And part of the track then goes to East Lowworth.
Gosh. So when would you have been to Creech Farm with your aunt?
It must have been, well, the only time I can remember was 1943. I would probably have been over there a couple of years before. No, it was before Christmas 43. They were given notice about 3 weeks before Christmas. I think it was probably the end of November 43.
That makes sense.
I mean, I can check that out, but I think we're within a week or two.
The itself was earlier, wasn't it?
No, the whole thing was taken over at the same time.
Oh, right. So that's exactly the same, of course, as the villages in Devon. Huge area of Devon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that was for the Slapton Sands. Yes. That's same thing.
Which was
and Imber and the Salisbury Plain. That was taken over more or less at the same time. There are there's a series of photographs I've got, which my daughter-in-law downloaded for me, the Imperial War Museum, who quite a famous photographer from World War II, was a Sergeant Hardy. Can't think of his given name at the moment, but
is he British or American?
He's British. on behalf of the Americans, he took a photograph of every cottage and house in the whole area.
Well, you see, I've seen some of those years and years ago.
Yes.
In the Imperial War Museum Library. I'm talking about 40 odd years ago. Probably.
Yes.
And there were a lot of photographs there. This is before computers, but just with a US Army stamp on them.
Yep.
Of all of the houses.
Yes.
So that somebody went round taking these really lovely pictures.
Yeah, Sergeant Bert Hardy. Bert Hardy. He's quite a famous photographer of World War II.
I've got one of his books.
Have you? Right.
Very famous.
Yep, Sergeant Bert Hardy. It came to be that.
Picture post photographer.
Yes, he was. But I can't understand. He seemed to do civilian work and service work. So he was sent there as Sergeant Hardy at that time to take the photographs for the Americans. And I mean, how he got round, I don't know, because there was an awful lot of area to cover, lugging your camera. And
well, he probably had the use of a jeep.
Yes, he could have done. The Americans could have taken him around.
Well, that is very. I mean, we're going a bit off piece.
Yes.
But it's very interesting.
Right.
Because that sort of ties a whole lot of things in that, as you say, people don't really think or know so much about.
No.
Which was that it wasn't just Tyneham.
No.
It was these other places.
Yes.
And it was your Aunt Sue.
Yes.
She was one of those people.
Yes.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling as though we need a little break.
Yeah.
Should we take a little break?
Yes, certainly.
I don't know how the time's going. Let's.
Would you like a cup of coffee?
I would love a cup of coffee.
Great.
Let me take the microphone off you.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll park it in its little hutch.
Yep.
It's still recording, so that's all encouraging. Let me turn this off.